All right, welcome back to Trampled Underfoot Podcast. This is Eloy coming at you. Back to Trampled Underfoot Podcast. Oh, you might want to mute that.
Yeah, I just did. Sorry. I have that open for the, I know we went live and you were all ready and raring to go and everything. And you got to remember, it's 11:55 in the morning to me.
Right.
And I did one of my hibernations. I was up pretty late last night getting website revamp taken care of and what have you with the webmaster to the stars, Steve Nealon. And I slept until 10. So I've been up for not quite 2 hours yet. Second cup of coffee is firmly, in hand. And we decide to go live and it's like, huh? What? So yeah, I had the YouTube feed open over here on the other side, just in case anybody drops in. And if you do drop in, good morning. So,
or good afternoon.
Or good afternoon for those of you who are on the Eastern time zone who have been, out in the real world all day already.
So I've been up since 6 o'clock. Last night we had a late hangout session, and like you were saying, you were hanging out with us and Steve Nealon of Harneal Media, and it's funny because just a personal aside before we get into it, I've got a couple of things that I want to share with Mark, but this will lead us into it quite nicely, I hope.
Yeah.
So, maybe you don't want to air dirty laundry over the airwaves.
Well, not dirty laundry. If the shorts are nice and cleaned, we're good.
Well, Mark was tangled in back web website stuff, and so you guys headed out so that you could work on some things over on your website. And I hung out a little bit with Ashley from Chip Builds and Patrick's workshop. And we hung out a little bit and we were looking at stuff, but then I decided to go because it was getting late. Mm-hmm. And so after that, I was winding down to go to bed because it was really getting late. We were talking about 3 o'clock in the morning for me at that point.
Yeah.
And I got into watching, as I always do, to wind down, a little bit of a documentary here or some current events there or whatever, but I got into some viewing, and I was watching a documentary which I'll tell you about, and see what you think. I know you've talked about it before, but I was sitting here and I started hearing like a horn. And from inside the house, it's very difficult to pinpoint necessarily because all the sound from outside is bouncing. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, and there's this loud horn, bam, bam, but just constant. And I'm like, what the hell? My dog's sitting there not even bothering with it. I guess he's done with any sounds from outside, unless they're human. If there's mechanical sounds, he's like, whatever. And it was starting to bug me because it's 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'm like, well, this is weird. It felt weird. I went to the window in the living room, and sure enough, there's a car honking. I open the door, I look out, there's a car over here in Sweetwater. They just recently, within the past 6, 7, 8 years, created in the what's that public area that's part of people's properties, but it's like access for city and county.
An easement or something like that. Yeah.
The easement area. Originally, the easements here were just green grass, and it would become soggy when the thunderstorms and rains came through, but people would be able to park their cars just anywhere, and there was no parking issue.
Right.
Because there was plenty of green area for everybody to do. And then a few years ago, they started putting in these enclosure areas made out of cement where they plant palm trees. They're beautifying the area because they're building the place up to make it a college town, whatever. So now every property has a limited amount of space, and there was a car, apparently, I was assuming that a car had taken the spot of one of the people down the road, and the person had come back home from whatever and was jammed up, on the road, honking, but in a desperate thing. And then the person started revving the engine with the brakes on, creating smoke. And it was like, what the hell? And then a car came by, and then that car took off. And then I came back in, and then all of a sudden I hear the horns again after like 10 minutes or less. I go back outside. It's 3:00 in the morning, dude. It's like, what the hell? And the car is revving and revving, like creating a freaking scene. And all the neighbors are like not even bothering with it. And it left again. And it comes back again within 5 minutes or so. And this time I couldn't see because I've got trees in my like I can't look all the way, but I could see it if it's in the road. This time it sounded like the person was grabbing things and throwing it at one of the cars that were parked. Like wham, bam, boom, bam. And anyways, with that said, I thought two things. Tell me what you think. One, it could be that someone had taken their space. There's always that. Two, a angry and disgruntled girlfriend or boyfriend trying to, you know what I'm saying, cause chaos. Hey, you cheated on me, or hey, you broke up with me, and or hey, I want my dress back, or hey, my football, something like that.
What do you want? My records back. I want my records back.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's a strange one. I mean, and there's a third possibility. That's drugs,
Oh, yeah.
A mind is a terrible thing. It's just, wow. I don't know. I stop with 20 years of working with the public, 15 of those in a casino, where I've seen folks who react to certain things in certain ways after they've had a few drinks put in them. I stopped trying to second guess human nature, and you never know what's going to make somebody snap. I mean, it could have been anything. Did you go out and look this morning to see if there was any kind of carnage on a vehicle that somebody was taking their aggressions out on? Or
I went out this morning, and I actually went to the supermarket, this and that, and I did look. But I didn't see anything strange, and frankly, I don't pay attention to the make and models and anybody around my area, except for the few key people. And that section of the street has like a lot of families because it's like apartments and whatnot. So
I don't know, man. That's weird. You got to be careful nowadays. You really do. You got to be careful who you upset. You have to be careful. I don't know. Thank God I've been married for coming up on 31 years in just a couple of weeks here, because the whole dating thing nowadays, I mean, I see things like that where, you can bet it's probably up on somebody's Instagram or somebody's Facebook this morning.
Yeah.
You may have been a peripheral witness to the next viral video as far as that's concerned, because I mean, there are people that will go out and do stuff like that just for giggles, to throw it up on, whatever social media they want.
Yeah. But this seemed like a petulant,
it sounds like, I think you may be right with the disgruntled significant other or former significant other who won't let go.
Yeah.
But yeah, and you get alcohol or drug induced. For years we called whiskey liquid courage, and the first thing to go is your judgment. And stuff like that happens. I don't know, man. It's sad that we've kind of devolved to that state. But then again, I don't know that that's anything new. I think it's always been that way. It's just back in the, like the 1800s, it took a few days. So, because you were on horseback and you
had to horse over.
Yeah, and when you think about it, your circle of friends back then, when you didn't have the internet, was pretty small and pretty tight. So if something strange happened to somebody, you kind of had a better idea who it was. Now we're so spread out. I mean, my circle of friends encompasses. I talk to people in New Zealand and Australia who I've never met face to face, but I do consider friends, because you develop that kind of a long distance relationship with folks. And my circle of friends is miles wide now. So it's kind of strange.
Well, it's like back then like I said, they'd have to horse there, right? Or trek. But it's like in that scenario, it's so easy to get in a car and press the gas pedal,
Yeah,
maybe,
it is.
maybe not put on the seatbelt, you should, but it's easy. They'd have to think the guy would have to be sitting in his cottage thinking, I'm gonna go over there and give her a piece of my mind. And then he thinks, oh yeah, I have to horse all the way across the valley.
I gotta stock up provisions. This is a 4-day ride,
Yeah. So
and after about the next morning, as the alcohol wears off, is like, what the hell am I doing? Turn around and go back home.
Yeah, it's a tough thing, so I don't think I've ever told. I'll tell this story. Actually, I wanted to tell you the documentary that I was watching, but I'll tell you this story. See if anything comes of it. But so, in high school, I met a girl, and she was just the most beautiful little button that you'd ever seen. And she was a tiny little thing, and we were in high school, and I had met her because she lived right where that car was blaring. She lived on the upper apartment, and one time I was riding bike. We were kids, 15, 16, and I looked up at a window as I was riding in the street, and there was this girl peeking through the window. And then I looked, and when our eyes met, she turned and left the windowsill. The blinds, they folded back together, so she was caught, and she went back. And in when school started that semester, we would take the same bus, and we just started getting. I came up to her. Actually, no. What happened was we were on the bus coming back one day. After just little, how young love is, and all that. And we were on the bus, and there were these vicious, awake ladies, high school girls, and they were sitting in the seat in front of me, turned around, and we were having they sparked up a conversation with me. You're a 15-year-old kid, you're kind of like, you don't spark up incredible conversations, but women tend to be more sociable and interactive, a little bit more developed in that sense at that age, in my experience. Could be wrong, but I think that, that's my experience. And they were like, so what's your name? So this and that. And that girl was sitting on the other end of the bus, couple of seats forward. And they were telling me, and who are you? And this and that. And I was answering the questions. And then when there was a break, I said, and who is she? I pointed off to her. And she, she got shy about that, but that started a little, like, it was my indication that I liked her. I was interested in her, and we ended up being boyfriend and girlfriend. And when you're young, and we would ride the bus together, going and coming back. We'd spend time. It was just, a young love affair. And so as time went on, we used to walk each other to each class. And as time went on, one day I went to one of her classes. I had missed getting there, but I was going to say hello before running off to my class. And I go there, and she's sitting on her desk. And I see the scene that unfolded before me in my young 15, 16-year-old eyes, magnified by the inexperience of my youth. And my passions and petulance. And I looked through that little window. The little windows were rectangular.
Yeah, in the door. Yeah.
Yeah. And I looked, and they had like this mesh, so that when I guess impact resistant or whatever. And I looked through that little window, and her desk was sitting right there, and there was a guy in front of her, turned around with both of his hands touching her hands. And right behind her was a guy grabbing her hair and caressing and combing her hair.
Uh-oh.
I was standing there looking, and I saw that, and to me, it looked like some sort of sandwich that was going on.
Oh man.
In my, to my eyes, that looked like a exploding threesome or something like that. I was livid.
Yeah.
And my jealousy just took the best of me, and it wound down after that, after a textbook incident where a dude, could have been one of them, couldn't, maybe not, when I was on the second story, she was on the first floor walking to the classroom, and a guy comes up from behind and goes like this and puts his arm around her. And I'm on the second, I had a math book. I looked down, I said, "Hey, you." And the guy turned around and she ducked her head and she left.
Mm.
And I grabbed the book from the second floor and it went woof through it. It went like a Chinese ninja star, flowing like to nail him. And I ran down. He fled. He fled. And so it broke up after that. But yeah, it's just too much. But petulant. So long story short, I kind of understand the inexperience of youth, but as you become an adult, I can still understand it if there's investment in it and stuff, but there's issues there. You get to a point, that you realize, if the person doesn't want to, be with the other person, things should go amicably.
Yeah. If it's possible, but very few of them ever do. I mean, I never had any dramatic situations like that. Most of my, at that age, most of my girlfriends and we split up just kind of by mutual consent, or, other things happened. One girlfriend moved to another state, stuff like that. And then when I was 16, we moved from California back up here to Oregon, and you have to say goodbye. And it's funny, we think at that age that everything should last forever, and everything that we do is forever. Not even we think we know everything when we don't know a thing at all, but we think we know. And judgment is just something we don't have, because you got to figure, when you're 16 years old, 5 years is just a little more than a third of your life. You have nothing to base anything on but your personal experience. So fathoming the next 30 years is just out of your realm of possibility. I know when I was 16, I couldn't imagine being 57 years old. I couldn't imagine being 30 years old.
It's amazing. It's totally shockingly amazing.
And at that age, you are so filled with not only mental confusion, because at that time my priority was my car and music, and everything else that came along was just icing on that cake. But you're also hormone-filled masses of acne with changing voices, and half the time you're not in control of anything you're doing anyway. So what I'm getting at is the decision-making process at that age is not generally a good thing. Yeah. And my second marriage is proof of that, because I thought I knew what I was doing in my first marriage, and it just did not work. We were great together at first, but after that we were really rotten together, and that was not a good split up. And I hold no grudges against her at all, but it's just, I don't know, that's the thing that happens to every one of us. I mean, we think we know what we're doing. We have absolutely no clue what we're doing, and we're so sure of ourselves we won't take advice from people who have done the same thing. So we're doomed to repeat those mistakes. I mean, there are exceptions to every rule. I know some people who had their heads on straight at that early age, but I certainly wasn't among them.
One thing that surprises me too about this whole thing that we're talking about is that, when you're a kid, you kind of look at people that are older and you think to yourself, well, boy, they know things, and it's true that they do, but life is an ever evolving journey, and it's like, you never stop learning and growing, and or at least maybe it's the stage I'm in at my age, but I don't think so. I think I've trekked enough to sort of come to the realization, unless you're incredibly like a narcissistic type that fools themselves to believe that they're all knowing. I feel that we're always learning lessons in life.
Oh yeah. I don't mean to give the impression that I figured anything out, because
I'm not,
haven't.
I'm not. Wait. Just for the record, I'm not saying that in reference to what you're saying. I'm just
I know.
Yeah.
And I'm of the same opinion. Like I said, I'm not out to give anybody the impression that I figured out the life, the universe, and everything, because I haven't. I just know what works for me and what didn't work for me. And sometimes when you say, "Man, I'll never do that again," you mean it,
Yeah.
I mean, my wife, I thank God I met the woman of my dreams, later in life. And we've been together for 31 years. We tease each other back and forth about we're both just too lazy to train somebody new. But that's part of it. It's that we have the same sense of humor where we can throw little things like that back and forth. And we both know it's in jest. We both, we don't make one another the butt of a joke. The insult humor is not a part of our relationship at all, because we genuinely don't feel that way. I wouldn't want to insult her. So, as you grow and you mature and things become a little bit more clear in life, you start to get a little bit more discerning in who you want to date and who you want to associate with. You're a little bit more selective. And when everything lines up and all of those, we don't want to think that we walk around with a checklist, but we do. When all those little boxes are ticked, you can kind of start, you know what, this may be the one. And boom, 31 years later. I mean, and it doesn't happen for everybody. I know that. And, but, we're all just human. And, I don't know. Then again, we may be reading entirely too much in that incident, and it could have been just random, Random things do still happen.
Well, it could have been random, but I have knowledge of this area's sort of, complications, and the parking is one of them. So it could be a parking issue, but I strongly feel that it was and again, we're supposing that it was some sort of love breaking down type situation.
Well, I was talking about checklists a second ago. It does tick a few boxes. I mean, a random thing, why would they come back?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
That's a little bit of, that shows a little bit of intent there. That's a little bit less spontaneity. So I don't know, man. It's a weird world. Be careful who you cheese off.
Well, there's lots of craziness going on.
Yeah.
But that evening, which was last night, after that, all that, or as that was going on, because it was back and forth, that's why I was so alarmed. And in fact, one of the neighbors as well came out, but nobody else. It was just me and that other neighbor just paying it. So there's a couple of people that when they hear the warning bells or sirens that will act, but every other neighbor was like, I don't care, in their beds and stuff. But it was loud and smoke billowing up as they were pressing the gas. It was incredible. But I went back in, and I don't know why, but I stumbled across, well, who knows why anymore, on Google. Seriously? I stumbled across a YouTube documentary on the making of one of your favorite horror movies, The Exorcist. Now, I know you don't like that subject, and I know it's a divergence there. But can I tell you real quick?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I know you don't like.
I'm open. You know, you kind of think you have me figured out. I'm going to do a switch up on you. Go for it, man.
Well, so I was watching, and I never knew the backstory, but just as a recap, it's based on supposed true events that were published in papers and whatnot, newspapers and all that, where a family from Maryland, their kids started. It was a boy started wigging out,
Mhm.
and was receiving scratches on his body, and there was all sorts of stuff, and they didn't know who to turn to. They turned to their pastor. They couldn't deal with it, and they said, look, you got to send this to the Catholics, because they're kind of the ones that do this sort of thing. And at the time, I think it was the early 1970s, if not late 1960s, when this happened to this family. But these things unfolded. They moved out to somewhere in the middle of the country. I forget where, Missouri, or I don't know where. And then there they had another priest, and they tried for weeks and weeks and weeks, and one day it was over with. But there was really weird things happening, and a reporter caught wind of it and started doing research, and that guy was the one that wrote the book.
William Peter Blatty.
That guy, yeah.
Okay.
I'm glad you knew the name.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, dude, it was really weird. And prior to that, as far as the documentary was concerned, they were talking about like exorcism and this and that in the public conscious was something of the past, like a medieval sort of like old world, thing. And then when this happened, and then the movie came out, there were reports of exorcisms all over the place. Like, it's weird how all of a sudden it's like, everywhere.
When something enters the public consciousness, because I remember that time when the movie came out, and like I said before, my parents wouldn't let me see the movie. My mother was dead set against it. It came out, I want to say, in 1972, so I was 11 years old, and she was like, "No, you're just too young for this. You're just too young for this." They went and saw the movie at the theater, and it scared the hell out of my dad. Well, unbeknownst to my mother, my dad was an avid reader. He bought the book and read the book.
Oh, goodness.
Well, I got my hands on that book and I read it, and it scared the bejeebers out of me too. And I will admit, just something simple and stupid like I remember it to this day, something as simple and stupid as getting out of the car at night. We'd come home from going out to dinner or something like that, get out of the car and walk up to the house. And maybe Dad forgot to turn on the porch light or something like that. But as we're trooping out of the car, I'm looking over my shoulder. Is something going to jump out of the bushes?
Yeah.
I'm 11, 12 years old, supposed to be mature enough not to be frightened by things like that. But that book really shook me up for a little while. And if I had to go out in the backyard for something at night, for some ungodly reason, call the dog in or what have you, if I went out the kitchen door into the garage and walked across that dark garage,
you went faster.
That door, I did. And I was looking over my shoulder. I was afraid of things going bump in the night. Of course, later on, that didn't last very long. But when something enters the public consciousness like that, there are people out there that would jump on it, and oh yeah, that happened to me too. And then go down the list and name all the things that has happened. And, exorcism stories were in the public eye, and it was, the big thing then. But yeah, I do remember that time. It was pretty weird. It was pretty wild. I never knew that it was based on anything like that. I didn't know it was based on any kind of a factual thing that happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. If you're asking my opinion if things like that do happen, I don't know. I really don't know. There are too many strange things that happen in the world to say, yes, it is true. No, it's false. I have to default to, I don't know.
Yeah. I guess I would say the same thing. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think there are too many things that we're never going to know, because you get into, and I don't want to discuss spirituality or anything like that, because I believe that's so highly individualized that any kind of a discussion on it is kind of, you know, futility basically enters into it. But when you start getting into that realm, nobody can say yes, no, or maybe. I mean, you might feel confident enough to say yes, no, or maybe, but you're right and wrong at the same time. So
Right.
I just, yeah.
You need a confirmation of a thing like that. The one thing back when I was a kid that stuck in my mind, there was a lot of things like that you're talking about, as far as doing a little quicker of a walk from one place to the other
Yep.
at night because of lights and this and that. You just seen a scary movie. But one thing that happened to me a lot for a period of time is that I'd go in a room, go to the bathroom or whatever, come back, and the lights are on when they were off, or vice versa. Or I go to the bathroom, the lights are on, I turn them off, and then I come back, the lights are on. Lights being on when I had shut them off, or this or now. Before I tell you what I think about that, now, did you ever have that situation occur?
No. But then again, see, you were an only child, right? You don't have any brothers or sisters?
No.
Okay. I have a little brother, and he's 4 years younger than me. You didn't have that rivalry thing going on. My brother would do stuff like that just to bug me, just to mess with me. You know?
Yeah.
He's got a very devious mind, and I kind of learned, believe it or not, I kind of learned some of it from him. He would do stuff like that, and the only way I knew that it was him was because I caught him too many times. You know, he had a devious mind, but execution was not always up to par, if you know what I mean. Like, I would go out of my room to go to the bathroom, and he would go, you know, turn off a light or go move something in my room just to mess with me. You know, I'd go into the bathroom, close the door, and I'd come out, and my guitar would no longer be on my bed. It'd be in the living room, sitting on the couch.
Yeah, but
Something like that. You know,
you quickly would think.
yeah. So if anything weird like that, heck, who knows? Our house may have been haunted, but too many times I caught him in mid movement. You know, I'd come out of the bathroom and he'd have it in his hand walking down the hall. Oh man, you know, so if something goofy happened, I automatically assumed it was him messing with me.
Well,
you know?
So this is what I've come up with in my mind to solve that issue. A, it could totally be that the switches were being switched, you know, by some phantom power. Or I just, in my mind, thought I switched it off and did not. You know what I'm saying? Like, because you're a kid, you're in your own world, so there's that. And the third one is, apart from me at home, there was my mom and my dad, although it's more likely that they would not leave the lights on since they had to pay for it.
Yeah, it would be more likely. I know in my house, that was the number one thing I had with my kids was turn off the light. I would be more likely to shut the light off. If I'm walking down the hallway and one of the kids' lights on in their bedroom, shut it off. You know, but turning lights on or stuff like that, no, that's less likely. Of course, then again, I don't have a devious mind like that. So, but you know, now on a related subject, you were talking about, you know, The Exorcist in the background to that. I can't speak to physical signs like scars or scratches on a person's body or something like that, but there have been documented cases where people thought they were in a house that was haunted. Strange things would happen. They would hear noises, they would see visions, and things like you were talking about, lights on, and, you know, an overwhelming sense of dread in the whole family. Certain people reacting to things, you know, bad dreams and hearing voices and things like that. And it turns out after, you know, they would leave the house and be fine. and everything was great, you know, and then come back to the house, and within just a couple of days, these things started happening to him again. And everything that I have just described are signs of carbon monoxide poisoning.
Mm.
And in several of these cases, what they had was they had faulty boilers, like down in the basement where the exhaust was not venting. We're talking about
Right.
for heating water or heating systems for the whole house.
Mm-hmm.
And these people were slowly being poisoned.
Yeah.
Carbon monoxide will cause visual and audio hallucinations. And, you know, the number one was that laying in bed with a feeling of a pressure on your chest, that you know, you couldn't breathe, and, you know, and then all of a sudden it would be gone as your body reacts and you inhale faster and deeper to get oxygen, what have you. And now that doesn't explain everything.
No, but
explanations. There are definite documented cases, and, you know, people have come, they fix the boiler, do whatever, and all that goes away. Now, so, you know.
So let me throw something out that I just thought of. And by the way, I've seen one thing that I can't explain up in the skies that I guess would have to do more with UFO type things. And I'm not a UFO person, mind you, at all. Like, I believe it's just us. I'm open to suggestions, but I think it's just us. You know what I'm saying? I did see lights crawling across the sky, and I wasn't the only one. And it wasn't a plane, could be a plane, but they were in formation. They were tiny little lights, and it was the strangest thing. I did go on YouTube after the fact, and these things are spotted. I thought, is it weather balloons? A friend of mine was here with me. The neighbors saw it. We were looking, what the heck is that? And they were just up in the sky. We couldn't place it. I mean, is it a helicopter, formation of helicopters? Is it? We had no idea. So it was unexplained. There are videos of that same type of thing on YouTube. Yeah. And I saw it, you know what I'm saying? So it's an unexplained thing. I know it's divergent, you know, it's sort of out of the realm of what we're talking about, but it's kind of in the mystery category.
Just throwing it out there, I think it's pretty narcissistic and arrogant of us as a species to think that we're the only ones out here. When you think about the, you know, the infinite reaches of the universe, chances are pretty good that there is another civilization somewhere. Now, whether they have the technology to come here or not is open to debate. I've never seen anything like that, so I don't know. I have seen things in the sky that I couldn't explain, and then later on was able to explain. I'll give you a story to demonstrate what I mean. I was probably 16, 17. We were living up here in Oregon, and I don't even remember why we were doing it, but for some reason, my grandparents had a house kind of out in the country, my grandparents on my father's side. And me, my brother, and a couple of my friends were kind of camping out in their front yard. So it's like 10, 11 o'clock at night. We're in their front yard. We're in sleeping bags. It's beautiful weather. It's probably 80 degrees. And we're all just chilling out in the front yard. And everybody else, I'm laying there trying to fall asleep, and everybody else is already asleep. And I look up, and I'm kind of just looking at the stars. And all of a sudden, I see one moving. And it's moving really slow. You know, it's not, but it's moving in a straight trajectory. And I would look away and then come back to it just to make sure, am I seeing what I think I'm seeing? And sure enough, it was, you know, just tracking across the sky. And I had no idea what that was. I mean, you could tell it wasn't an airplane. There were no flashing lights on it at all. And it was, you could tell it was way, way up there. It was way the heck up there. And for years, I had no idea what it was that I had seen until I was, oh boy. So see, if I was 16 or 17, we're looking at 1978, 79, somewhere in that area, 76, 77, 78, 79. I was...
You just gave us a window of like
Yeah.
half a decade.
Well, 3-4 years. Because I don't remember exactly how old I was.
No, I get you.
But it was years later. I had been in the Army, gotten out, was married to Linda, and we were in Nevada, and my father had gotten hot and heavy into astronomy, had a couple telescopes, and we were outside late at night out in this field somewhere out in the desert, and I saw another one doing exactly the same thing. And I says, look at that. Am I the only one seeing this? Look at that. What is that? And my father tracked on it. He says, oh, that's a satellite.
Hmm.
I said, what? He's, yeah, that's a satellite. You watch, you'll see them all over the place. So it was that many years later. And I'm in my 30s. We're talking about 1998 here. So for that long, I had no idea what the heck it was. It was unidentified to me. But when I saw it again and got confirmation that, yes, you're not seeing things, dummy, it was a satellite. I'm like, now it makes sense. It was not veering in direction. It's just cruising along, and the sun was hitting it at just the right position to where I saw it. And now that I know what that is that I'm looking at, you can go outside in any given night, a clear night, and if I shut my front porch light off, I can stand there and I can look, and within just a few minutes, I'll spot another one. And you can see, so there may be some of that involved with some of these sightings. And I have the most I've ever seen at one time, just standing out on the front porch, within about 3 minutes time, the most I've ever seen was 8. At the same time. And there'd be 2 or 3 look like they're kind of in formation, but not really. You can see they're spaced further apart.
But in my scenario of what happened, it was nighttime. Mm-hmm. And they were lit up. Like there was light from them. And it was a cluster. Mm-hmm. Like imagine a flock of birds. Mm-hmm. And they weren't going in one pattern. Yeah. It wasn't, they were traveling in the same direction, but they were
moving. Okay, yeah, that's something different.
Now, here in Miami and out in the Everglades, there are people, a buddy of mine used to do this a lot, that they would take paper bags and they put light, just whatever, a candle or something, or a little bit of a fire, and it would fill up the gases, and that hot air would lift those little balloons up. But here's the thing, those will go pretty far.
Guilty.
But, oh yeah, you've done those? Uh-huh. But the thing is that these things were like way too far.
Yeah.
So it's just one of those things. I can't tell you that it was. I can't tell you those were draconians from the third dimension. I can't tell you. I can't tell you they're Andromedans from the Icarus constellation. I can't. They're just. It's something that I saw that I can't, explain. But maybe I'm sure that there's a rational explanation for it.
True. But to you, they were unidentified. So, and that happens a lot. Now, I lived out in the Nevada desert for 15 years, and not all that far away from the dreaded Area 51. It was maybe 150 miles away from me. And you see some strange things in the night sky. And if you don't know what you're looking for or looking at, it can, it can open up a lot of questions for you. But I still find it a little bit ironic that, and I mean, for years, you heard about UFO sightings down there and this, that, and the other. But the minute the F-117 stealth fighter and the B-2 bomber became public, and they were showing pictures of them, and you could go to air shows and see them for yourself, the number of UFO sightings in that area plummeted to 0. And because you had down in that area, you not only had Groom Lake, but you also had the Tonopah Test Range where these fighters were based, and Nellis Air Force Base where the bombers were based. I may have that backwards, but you had both of those out there, and they went out on night flights, on night missions. And they didn't always run anti-collision lights. That's what those flashing lights on airplanes are. They're anti-collision lights. And they flash because a single steady point of light can start blending in with things on the ground. So by flashing up there, it keeps that spatial separation. I'm getting technical here. Too many years in aviation. I apologize. But you can pick it out from something that's on the ground.
Right.
Know it's in the air. And it's a warning to other pilots that there's something else up here besides yourself. So, but they would fly night missions out there away from all the commercial air traffic routes without those anti-collision lights, flying with night vision goggles for training purposes. And their mission is to fly at night. So that's what they did. And you would see strange things out in the sky like that. But the minute it became public knowledge, the UFO sightings just dried up and went away. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't something out there, because I just don't know. All I know is I've never really seen one.
Well, how about, so, oh, go ahead.
But that's about it. That's all.
Well, I was going to add to what you're saying, as far as all of a sudden when it was discovered that it was these aircrafts, UFO sightings dropped, right? Well, how about, we have a special creature here in Florida called the chupacabra. Oh, the chupacabra is in Puerto Rico. Over here, we have one called the skunk ape.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, ever since I heard of the skunk ape, it's our version of the Sasquatch or Bigfoot or Yeti.
Yep.
To me, I mean, there's a lot of wilderness out there. There's a lot of wilderness out here in Florida. But to me, it sounds like people, making, oh, this is great for business, so let's create. And they have like a visitor center and the whole thing.
Well, yeah. Area 51 did that with the town of Rachel, Nevada. I mean, there was a little bar that was failing. I mean, there's nothing out in Rachel. It is not a destination. The population goes down at night. Okay.
Is it Roswell?
No, that's New Mexico.
Okay.
This is out close to Area 51.
Okay.
And this little bar was failing miserably until they changed their name to the Little Alien Inn. A little pun on alien, Yeah. And then all of a sudden, tourism, they named a stretch of freeway there. Well, freeway is being generous. It's 2-lane blacktop. They named a stretch of highway. The state named it the Extraterrestrial Highway.
That's good. So good.
For tourism. And people would flock to that place from Vegas. And I mean, they had somebody did a fiberglass alien, the gray with the big eyes and stuff like that. And they put it out in front of this bar, and they were selling merch. I mean, they had t-shirts, posters and everything. They made a killing off of that, and they really exploited it. And I don't blame them a bit, because you talk about podunk. It's not quite the end of the earth, but you can see it from there.
Yeah.
And there was no reason to go to that place until the hype started, and until all this. And they would go out for viewing parties. The parking lot would be full. They'd shut off all the lights and everything, and people are out there with binoculars and what have you. And, private pilots would fly over, and people like this. I know people like that. They see an airplane go by. Oh, that's a UFO.
Yeah.
No, it's an airplane. Look, you can hear the propeller. No, it's a UFO. Okay, fine. It's your story. Tell it the way you want. But yeah, you're right. There is a little bit of that going on. I've got this opportunity. Let me cash in a little bit here. And you're talking to somebody who's in Sasquatch country.
Yeah.
I've never seen or heard anything like that in my life. I was born here. I've been coming back and leaving and coming back for 50 years, 57 years. I've never seen anything that would lead me to believe that there was something like that out there. Again, I don't know, but where's the evidence? That's all I can say. Show me, and you may change my mind. But right now, I don't know. I have a lot of doubts.
Well, I've got a couple of things within this topic to throw at you, but one is that, a little bit more like on a serious note, because of the lack of technology, Christopher Columbus, in his writings, if you go back in those logs, captain's log, Um, he says that there were lights in the sky, that they were lost at one point, and that there were lights in the sky. And those lights shifted and moved in the direction, and they followed and led them into, like, I don't have the specific, I'm paraphrasing from memory, but in their actual, manuscripts, there were lights in the sky they identified as such, that they thought that they were stars. He wrote, and they moved in a direction, and they followed those stars or those lights. You can go back and check it out. I find that incredibly interesting. I never delved too much into it, but I read about it, and I thought to myself, one day I want to delve into that to see what it is more specifically. But I found that interesting.
Yeah,
because you can't fake that unless they were cashing in with the lights and this and that, or they were telling a fib to make it sound amazing.
Yeah. Oh, there was a lot of embellishment like that. There was embellishment for several reasons. Number one, you got to remember that Columbus, that was a Spanish expedition.
Yeah.
So everything was for Spain. And there were trade wars and literal wars. I mean, blasting people out of the water type wars going on. You had the Spanish, you had the French, you had the Portuguese, you had the Dutch and the English, all more or less at war with other at sea. And they would do things on purpose, write misleading information on purpose in their logs in case the ship was captured, to throw people off the scent. They would guide them into dangerous waters where, we went this direction, we went that direction, went the other direction, knowing that there were reefs and shoals there, and if they tried to follow in their footsteps, they'd end up wrecking their boat.
Let me read this to you. This is about the Christopher Columbus thing. In 1942, it's called 1942 Light Sighting on Wikipedia.
You mean 1492?
What did I say? 1942.
I mean, unless he was in the Navy. Yeah.
In 1492. So here's the
it was German U-boats, that's what it was.
So in 1492 light sightings, it was a sighting of unknown light during the first voyage of Christopher Columbus on October 11th, 1492, by some crew members of the Santa Maria Pinta and possibly the Nina. Shortly before landing in, I can't say that word, Guanahani, light was reported in Columbus's journal, Ferdinand Columbus, and it gives you some explanation. Columbus described the light as a small wax candle that rose and lifted up, with which seemed to be like which to few seemed to be an indication of land. Interesting. He received the royal reward for the sighting. His son Ferdinand. Well, say it again.
Ferdinand.
I'm all tongue twisted. Had characterized it as a candle that went up and down. And there's more information. Artificial origin, bioluminescence. They keep going, but essentially there was a UFO type sighting.
I think it's more likely that you nailed it in one of your first sentences. They received a royal reward.
Yeah.
I think you nailed it right there. Personally.
It could be.
Because like I say, they did embellish their travels and their stories. Did you ever see any, for instance, back then spice was a huge industry. Spices were needed. They were in demand constantly. Wars were fought over spices. The Dutch had New York was called originally New Amsterdam, and the Dutch traded to the English. They traded New York to the English in exchange for a couple of the Spice Islands in Indonesia because of nutmeg. They used nutmeg to preserve meat. They could preserve meat a little bit longer with nutmeg than without it. And that was important, really, really necessary. And but the British had more sources of nutmeg, so they could afford to give away some of these. So they traded these islands, but entire wars were fought over spice and seasonings. And things that we take for granted now, like cinnamon, were so rare and so hard to come by that the traders would embellish the stories about where these spices came from so they could get a higher price. And
Right.
I mentioned cinnamon specifically because at first, the story they told about cinnamon was that it was ripped from a certain area of a certain tree that man couldn't reach by a bird that was so dangerous and so vicious that it would strip a man to its bones in a minute. And it was only by getting a team of the bravest men it would strip these pieces of this cinnamon to make its nest, to ward off predators. The scent would ward off predators. And the only way they could get this cinnamon was to upset that nest and battle this bird with armies of men to finally bring it into submission, and they could take apart the nest and bring the cinnamon back to you. That's why we have such a high price. It's a high risk to us, you know. And they would tell these stories to bring up the price of their goods. And the explorers of the time would embellish their stories as well to increase the level of reward. Because make no mistake, they were all out for personal gain. That's why they did it. Some of them had the adventurous spirit. Most of them were out for the cash. And if they could tell a story like that about how divine providence brought us to this land, they were given favors by the church, by the king, the queen, whoever. And it just made their journey sound more perilous. Nobody wanted to hear a story about smooth sailing all the way across with no weather concerns, no threats, never being becalmed, and just going from point A to point B with nothing happen. Nobody wanted to hear a story like that. So on their way back, embellishments were made, or on their way there, embellishments were made.
So,
You could go from Spain to South America, which nobody had ever done before, and come back and tell any story you wanted.
so so you're saying that this is a possibility. You're not saying
Sure. No,
is,
I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm just saying I have just as much evidence as anybody else does. I mean, you know, and especially when you consider it's Christopher Columbus and his son who are saying this, but none of the other crew. I don't know. I mean, it's possible they did see something, and I wouldn't know what it was. I mean, I don't think it was a couple of seagulls playing around with a candle, but you know, I'm saying that it's just as likely the story was made up as it is true.
yeah,
You know,
but at the same time, that's it's a tough one, because out at sea, a light, it's kind of like, you know, well, how the heck did that, you know, that's not, you know, something that we would, unless there's like some
sure,
firefly or light bug that sails the ocean blue.
Yeah.
It's just it's a tough thing too. So it's kind of the fact that it was recorded back then, prior to all this technology and
Yeah.
stuff, it opens the door to speculation, because
Sure.
one can't, you know, it's one of those things. I found it like a cool little thing. But how about, within this conversation, there's people on YouTube, and I'm sure you've seen a bunch of them, or come across them at some point, that will be it. I don't know. You could pick like there's a reptilian space thing, or the Aztecs, or the Egyptian, just all that stuff, and then they concoct what seems to be concocting a very elaborate story around a real world thing, historical thing, like the pyramids, and they'll say the alien race from, Alpha Centauri 912b, their hierarchy status king from that alien race, Mogfard the Third, sent his wife Abilius, in rocket ships that this and they have all this complicated, but and they'll have seminars. And by the way, I'm open to suggestion. You know that better than anybody. But here's the thing, like because we've had a lot of conversations. I'm open to all and I enjoy watching and seeing. But here's the question I have in that scenario: How does that guy that's giving that lecture, and you'll see them on YouTube and stuff, have all that detail of Ferdinand Ugebug from the Draconius? How do they know all that? To the audience, does the audience ever not ask the question? Well, okay. So how do you know this bit and those specific that they give you the transcripts?
You are making the first mistake in that you are using critical thought. You're not supposed to use critical thought. You're not supposed to use logic. You're supposed to go, oh, okay, yeah, that's it. What can you say? If you say little purple dudes appeared in my bedroom, a certain percentage of people are going to believe you. A certain percentage of people are going to seek to commit you. A certain people are going to just ignore you and get on with their day. But it's that shotgun approach. If you put that out there, you don't need 100 million people to buy your book. You just need 10,000.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is, a certain part of me wishes I had that vivid of an imagination that I could make up something and make it sound convincing. But I'm the world's worst liar. And in that, I can't remember what I said, So unless I write it down and rehearse it and convince myself to actually believe it. And that a lot of that is the case too. If you say it often enough, you can convince yourself. But I think what it is it's a nice rice bowl. They found an audience. They're providing entertainment. And if they were put under oath, they would probably throw away about half of their speculation. But then again, I don't know. There's too much out there happening. I don't know. Did you ever read Chariots of the Gods by Eric von Däniken?
No.
Oh, well, he spent a lot of time talking about the Atacama Desert and the Nazca lines up there, the up in Peru, up on that high plain, the lines that are drawn in the desert floor into certain figures. There's a hummingbird and this, that, and he spent a lot of time talking about this one particular set of lines that looked like it kind of resembled a modern day airport runway system. And he was just out there pounding it in that this was their landing field. And I read that. I was fairly young. And I was like, oh, cool. Yeah, man, that sure enough, it looks like an airport. It looks like an airport. Until years later, Carl Sagan said, wait a minute. These people have the technology to travel millions of light years from another solar system to ours. What the hell do they need runways for? Are they flying B-52s? They don't need runways. Why would they need an airport? Why would they need runways? And that kind of when I went, you know what? He's absolutely right.
Yeah, but that's true if that's but that's not the end. See, that makes total sense, but that's not the end of the argument. To me, like that's powerful, because why would they need landing field? But how about if the tribes of that time in that area did that as, a sort of like calling out to, what I'm saying, like some sort of earthly patterns, showing to the sky, like an SOS or something like that. Like, there are options.
Well, there are several theories. There are several theories in that, and that area is mountainous and hilly. And they make the claim, von Däniken made the claim that, these patterns can only be seen from the air, which was patently false, and that's provable. You can go up the side of a hill, and you don't have to go very far. You can see them. We're talking about take you 15 minutes to walk up the hill and turn around and look, and there they are. You can see the entire pattern laid out. But there are several theories on that, and the most reasonable one to me is and this was on a documentary I watched I saw parts of just within the last few days on television, where they were talking about just this subject, in that most of those patterns and lines, if you look at them from a certain point of view, they all point in a certain direction. And at the end of the direction where they're pointing, right there on the line, you only have to dig down a certain amount and you find water. And the theory is that these were huge markers that could be seen from up in the hills that would point you to water.
Interesting.
And we're not talking about just enough water for a traveler to drink. We're talking about enough water to support a village. And, water tables raise and lower in the desert like that. This spring may dry up for a while and you go hit another one. But just about all of them, they have found a source of water and just not by digging very deep. And now the whole area, he did a disservice, von Däniken did, because these things stayed untouched for thousands of years. And then all of a sudden that book came out and people just flocked to the area and started tearing it up. Some of these things are only a couple inches scratched into the ground. And people out there with, motorcycles and vehicles and stuff like that are just really started to tear it up. And now the government has basically made it off limits. You can go in there with special permits and that's it, but it's not open to the public anymore. So, there's several theories as to what they are and what they were, but least credible of which is it's signs for, some alien race to see from, way up above and guide them along their way or try to attract them to come down.
But we do know that these people, and I'm sort of like going back, and these are paraphrasing little things that I have seen in documentaries, but we do know that these people did astrology and calculate the cycles and had temples with they had this knowledge. Sure. Which is very impressive, to be honest with you, no?
Well, it's observation. I mean, you go back to the ancient Greeks and you look at what they were doing. You had to know when to plant. You had to know when to harvest. And knowing the seasons and the cycles of the moon. Now, that's not to say that there wasn't a spiritual significance attached to this. There may very well have been. And in some cultures, it was heavy spiritual influence was attributed to these things, these cycles, certain gods here and certain gods there. But from a practical standpoint, you had to know when to plant, when to harvest, when the migration of this animal was going to start and when it was going to stop. But a lot of times they got it right, but more often than not, they got it wrong. I mean, for thousands of years, they didn't really know 100% for sure that birds migrated. I mean, you can find written records. People actually thought that birds hibernated and they just disappeared for the winter. They hibernated. There were some that speculated they went underwater and spent the winter there. And then when the sun came out and all the ice melted, they came back out and flew around and did what birds do. But they just made the wrong association. Pliny the Elder is a prime example of that. That man he's seen as some sort of genius, but he always got it wrong by just that much. Aristotle was the same way. He got so much wrong that what he did get right is almost accidental,
Well, we have such sort of information going. We have the luxury of all the information of our current time,
right,
and of the past, so that we can judge, the progression of thought and people's points of views on. So we have that advantage, and those people back then were limited in a lot. I mean, for goodness sakes, we can look at what weather patterns live.
Yeah, I was just getting ready to make that exact comparison. If you look at weather forecasting when I was young, a lot of it was guessing, simply because they didn't have the satellite system. They couldn't track a storm forming off the coast of Africa and heading up through the Atlantic. They couldn't track a hurricane. They just were, they knew certain things were happening, and they were counting on reports from, the Caribbean or from the South Atlantic, from ships or what have you. Now they can follow it in real time, and they can kind of guesstimate where it's going to hit and what have you. And we have now weeks of warning rather than just a couple of hours.
Just that point alone.
Yeah, just that alone. And being able to more readily predict tornado cycles when weather situations change by the minute, they're more able to track it and kind of give people warning, where before you had none. So, just advances in technology like that, and discovery. I mean, think back to, you're in Miami, and in an area that's been explored since the 1400s. Think back to how they described the manatee. I mean, the first reports of manatees, it was mermaids, and it were these beautiful, gorgeous women. Well, I guess if you spent that many months at sea, you would look at a manatee and go, okay. But it was nothing like what the first portrayals were.
I will say that, since you're bringing in like mermaids and stuff, so there's a lot of, I guess, mythological creatures as well. There's talk of fairies in, I guess, Great Britain throughout, Ireland, as just everywhere. And the other night, and it's one of those things where it's like, you think, oh, get out of here. It can't be. And for obvious reasons, a mythological sort of like medieval or ancient or whatever, fairies. Well, there's still talk of that stuff. I saw a documentary on that. There's still people and traditions in Ireland and parts of England and going up, through to Scotland, that's like folklore. Mm-hmm. And there's a tiny shoe that was found. I don't know if you've ever heard of this. Have you heard of this?
I don't know.
It was a tiny shoe, and it's in a museum. It's a tiny little shoe with the stitches are tiny. Everything is tiny. Where a normal human, you have to look at it with a frickin', it's got stitches and all. I saw a documentary. It wasn't on that, but it was on like folklore in general. And I don't know if it's a concrete thing or not, but they mentioned the tiny that was found somewhere in Ireland. And it was shipped off to a museum and this and that. And I was, to be honest with you, I was carving at the time when I was listening to the documentary, not watching it. I was like, man, I should pause. How was it? I was looking at the picture of the thing that I was carving and listening to the audio and not looking at the video. So I missed whether or not they showed the little shoe or whatever, but they said that that it was sewn and the whole 9 yards. It was little tiny, and that they talk about like a race of tiny humans and they call them fairies and this and that. And we've heard these stories, obviously, but I just found it fascinating. Could you imagine if that's even,
I'll go you one step further. The garden gnome. Ubiquitous garden gnome with the red hat.
Yeah.
With that red hat, German miners were known back in the 1600s to wear that hat. And the garden gnome was, there's controversy about where it actually came from, but the popularity rose when a guy by the name of Griebel, Joseph Griebel, I think was his name. He was a sculptor. He made a bunch of them, a couple of them, to put in his yard in an attempt to attract real gnomes. Because he believed in gnomes and fairies and witches and warlocks and things of that nature.
That's so awesome.
So he, as an artist, as a sculptor, he was, we've had this discussion before. Most artists are a little bit off their nut,
Yeah.
but I mean, even just a little bit slightly.
Yeah.
He genuinely believed that if he made a bunch of these gnomes, it was kind of act like duck decoys, and attract real ones, because he wanted to communicate with the gnomes and fairies. And of course, it didn't work, but folks went, "Hey, that's kind of neat." And then pretty soon they wanted some. And in fact, one of the first gnomes he ever created is in the British Museum. And we're looking back in I want to say the late 1700s, but yeah, there was belief in that up into the 20th century. It's sad to say, but Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the man who wrote the Sherlock Holmes stories, was a firm believer in it.
Well, it's not.
He really believed in gnomes and fairies, and
Well,
really attempted to communicate with them.
but it's not okay. So it's not that it's sad to say. You said sad to say. I get it. I understand, because it's like, but at the same. Oh, so look. So what? When did he? What decade are we talking about for that guy?
Oh, the 1920s. The 1920s,
Okay.
towards the end of his life. I mean, he spent the last 10, 15 years of his life firmly believed in it, and really honestly searching this stuff out. And in fact, he had a friendship with Harry Houdini, and that whole thing ended their friendship. They had been friends for several years, because Houdini was out to find the quacks. Houdini was a skeptic, but he did believe in, at the time it was called spiritualism, seances to try to communicate with the spirits of the dead and what have you. His thing was to expose the quacks and get down to the real ones. And the problem was, he never found a real one, or anything that he considered to be real. So he spent his later part of his life exposing the fakes and the frauds.
Well, so okay, so look, so you're talking 1920s for that guy that still believed in gnomes and whatnot. Harry Houdini, that was a believer, and then started searching out and found that everything was sort of a ripoff and a hoax.
Yeah.
But you're talking about the 1920s. If you subtract, a couple of decades, you're into the 1800s. There were advances.
Mm-hmm.
But we're talking about an era without electricity, widespread. At time, there was no electricity widespread.
In the 1920s, yeah. I mean, except for way out in rural America.
No, take 2 decades.
So the 1900s, 18 to 1900s, yeah. It was picking up, but yeah.
In the 1800s, there was no widespread electricity. Houses didn't run on electricity.
Right.
Cities may have had gas,
right,
and all
You're
that.
Talking Victorian era, yeah.
Right. So we're talking 18. So we're talking 2 to 20 years back.
Mm-hmm.
Those people, whatever their age in the 1920s, but you start going back, you start entering into a little bit more of. There's the telegraph, but things start to become a little bit more open to interpretation. There's solid. There's obviously a lot of textbooks. There's lots of newspapers. There's knowledge being obviously addressed, but it's quite removed from that spurt in the 1900s.
Mm-hmm.
So I could see how certain folklore would sort of be like, it's not altogether like what we have now. Mind you, we could be totally wrong, and there could be gnomes all over the place waiting for us to fall asleep, and then they party all night. I don't know, but but going back, even during the time of like the birth of this country,
mm-hmm.
People believed in witches and lightning strikes. Like Benjamin Franklin solved the thing with the lightning rod on homes, but people, if a house got struck with lightning, I always found this fascinating. They'd let it burn and save the houses, because they said that's God's, that's
Mm-hmm.
where it burnt, and that's it. And then they'd go to the houses next door, because that's the one that was meant to. And they thought lightning was revenge, some sort of like punishment. And they had all these ideas, and yet concurrent with that timeline, they had a lot of knowledge, sailing, measurements, just everything.
Yeah.
But they had missing information or lack of,
Right. And, ignorance does play a lot of it. We have always tried to explain things. I think that's part of human nature, and that we always try to explain things, especially things that we don't know. And so in order to make the world work, in your opinion, certain things, why does the wind blow? Well, we now know why the wind blows. We can sit back with established fact and say, yes, this is why the wind blows. But when you go back before we had all this technology and before science really became science and not just speculation, people needed to satisfy themselves, to make themselves feel secure in the world that they lived in. Well, it's this God, and when he's angry at this God, the wind blows. Well, okay, that makes the world work for me. Now I can get on with the rest of my life. That question's solved.
Right.
And we've done that since, the guy first started scratching pictures of bison on the wall in a cave. So we try to make the world work for us. And as technology develops and as logic and reason progress, and we can prove A plus B does equal C, then things kind of settle down.
So
But then again, if you look with all of our technological advances that we have today, our ability to sit here and communicate with one another across an entire continent at light speed in real time, with all of the technology that we have today, who's to say what's going to happen 100 years from now, and how antiquated and how quaint and campy and folky our whole YouTube and podcast experience be to our descendants down the road.
Oh yeah. I totally see that because of past experience that we have. Looking back, a person in the 1950s or 40s would feel quite modern and advanced and quite at the prime of technology, because in fact they were, because that was the time at at that moment, and they were at the cusp of everything that was happening.
Oh yeah.
And then you go forward a few decades, and all of a sudden that campiness, that sort of like just looking back in fondness type things, like good memories, that sort of lack of certain knowledge and technology, it becomes quite apparent. And I can totally see us in the rearview mirror of people in the future and looking at us and saying, boy, that was quite quaint. Look at them. Look at them. They were so funny. I could totally see that. But even those people in the future take note, and I'm sure that they'll know that and more, because knowledge will increase, I assume, unless something, they should be aware that going forward from them, same thing will apply. I don't know what advances will occur, but we have a certain idea. We're not limited with our imagination.
Well, we think we have an idea, but we don't know what's going on. You don't know what's happening on the next block from you, let alone what's happening in some research facility. We can only speculate as to what's going on. Go back 20 years. I don't think anybody could have anticipated the 3D printer being available to somebody for $150 that you could set up on a table right next to you and have it make something that some guy in Brazil designed on a lark, just on a whim.
Yeah.
I'm going to design this to do that. There was no way to foresee the ability to download a design off the internet and plug that into a printer and have a physical, tangible object you can hold in your hand. I don't think there was any way of anticipating that. So we think we know what's happening. We think we know what's going to go on. But you were looking at a video last night and sharing with us of this machine that you tractor feed paper into. And this machine cuts out paper layer by layer, glues that paper together, one layer on top of one another, and dyes the edge of that paper as it's doing this, and stacks up these layers of paper until you have a bust of a human, 10, 12 inches tall, or a statue of something. It's completely assembled. It's printed. It's in color. You have a statue of a face. You have a bust of a human taken from a photograph. And this is 2019. I had never heard of anything like that in my life. And I thought that was the absolute coolest thing in the world. That machine's probably got a 5-digit price tag. And 7 years from now, I could have one sitting on that shelf back there.
Yeah.
You know, the progression of technology. So what I'm getting at is, I'm not going to speculate as to what's going to be next. I'm just going to sit back with open-eyed wonder and watch and say, yeah, man, give it to me. You know, we just don't know.
Yep. I think that's a good way to wrap this one up. This is Trampled Underfoot Podcast with Mark Lindsay and Eloy Escojedo. And we also have a website, yeah?
We have a website, trampledunderfootpodcast.com. If you enjoyed your little stint with us this morning here live on YouTube, you can hit trampledunderfootpodcast.com and see past episodes. You can shoot us a message, give us some show suggestions, tell us what we got right, tell us what we got wrong, tell us what we need to shut up about, and, you know, learn a little bit.
Yeah, well, you know, we have a new episode every Tuesday around 5 a.m. that comes out, and you can find all those links here where you're listening or watching. So check out the description section for extra information. And yeah, the Wayback Machine that we have is pretty cool because you could go and surf past episodes with great topics. There's a lot of them that we've touched on.
Yes, and to everybody out there in the chat room watching us live on YouTube right now, I want to say thank you very much for joining us. If you enjoyed this kind of thing, you know, we've got a couple of past episodes here on YouTube, but thanks for joining us. Thanks for bantering with me back and forth in the chat. And if you have any suggestions and topics you want to talk to us about, let us know.
All right. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. Have a good night.